Spoilers ahead for Silence of the Lambs. Welcome to another episode of Screenwriters Rewatch, the show where we delve into the IMDb top 250, pull out some classics and see if they stack up. Today, in honor of Halloween this week, we are venturing into one of horror's very greatest. But before we get into that, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe. You can find us wherever you find podcasts, including YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Audible, and you can even find us on TikTok these days if you are so inclined. There is a little crossover with this episode on there, so you can catch us there. Also, don't forget you can buy us a coffee, because we like coffee here and it helps keep the lights on, so feel free to do that. Today, I'm joined by Caleb as we venture into the disturbed mind of a serial killer called Hannibal Lecter and decide whether or not this film belongs in the script department vaults located in Lecter's coveted view from his cell. I don't think he actually gets that view in the end from a cell, but anyway, we'll see. That's right, folks. Today, Screenwriters Rewatch The Silence of the Lambs. Caleb, you are our resident horror pro here at the script department. Tell me, what are you bringing to this rewatch of what is considered one of the greatest horror films of all times?
This is it's kind of a blind spot for me, but I've seen it before.
Yeah.
I mean, in blind spot, I mean that I haven't studied this movie over and over.
Sure.
I've only seen it. This is my second time. I watched it years ago and I really enjoyed it. And I've of course I know like all the cultural reference points. So like, yeah, I know the movie, but sitting down and watching the movie from beginning to end, this is my second time. So, is it a horror movie? Is it a crime movie? Is it a suspense thriller?
There are some blurred lines.
Is it a drama?
Is it? Yeah, it's interesting because this for me, I've seen it a bunch of times, but I watched it first in university, scared the living daylights out of me to start with, and then as I kind of went through, saw it again, found it less scary, saw it again recently, found it less scary, and it's interesting. So to your point, in terms of how do we categorize this, because I think it is a horror. I think certainly when it was made, it was a horror. So I think by that standard, it kind of has to be still, I guess. But it has become less horrifying as the years go by, and I think that when In Situ in its time, we were only sort of a few decades, but we're only a few decades on from, Hitchcock stabbing somebody for the first time on screen. We as an audience, I think we were quite new, quite green to horror movies, and we didn't have that. So there's a lot here that at the time would have been really gruesome and really kind of gory, but then obviously we got to things like Saw in the 2000s, and that all just got thrown out the window as like, okay, well, this is that now. So it's an interesting question.
We're just desensitized.
Totally desensitized now. That's the thing. Like, so do you think that, because it is an important question to ask on a rewatch podcast like this one, what is this now? What would you, if gun to your head or Hannibal Lecter's fork to your head, what is this film for you?
I would categorize as suspense thriller. And probably even a crime thriller, is the way that I would describe it now. Because I don't think that the horror elements, in context of the story, take it into that genre of horror where we recently talked about like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, sci-fi horror. There's a sense of maybe a sense of nihilism of like what the force that you're fighting against is like going to win no matter what. That's present in horror films, and obviously those are different. There's different genres of horror films, so like we don't have to get into that, but all of that like taken in is how I would categorize this. There are some really horrifying sequences in here that are amazing. And they, they do stand the test of time. And in the broader horror genre, like uh they come out as far as like the what's the best of the best. So yeah, I to answer your question, I love this movie. Finally,
Yeah.
it's great. It's a masterclass movie that I think you can just rewatch a lot, which I should probably do more with this movie. But um, there's a lot. It's a Academy Award winning script. Not that that's obviously the standard of what a good script is, but
No,
it's
sure,
an
but it was
accolade,
recognized as being, it was
Yeah.
recognized as being something great. No, sure.
And so I think that you can look at the script and clearly see why it won. There's a lot of character work going on, because this movie is, some of the scariest scenes are dialogue scenes, like, which doesn't make any sense. But it's some of the most disturbing stuff is um, close up and close up on Lecter and um, Clarice, where they're just discussing. Yeah. So that, that comes back to the dialogue that's written, and obviously the source material that this is coming from too. But yeah, like it's also the um Academy Award winning or nominated for editing.
I think so,
So
yeah.
yeah,
It cleaned
it
up
won the
the
big
Oscars that
five.
year. Yeah, it did. Yeah, the 5, it it really cleaned up, and I think it's one of only 3 movies to ever win those big 5, I think, and this one is the most recent of all of them. Um, so, it is it's a landmark motion picture, I think, in a lot of ways. Um, and it's interesting you mentioned, so the characters we'll talk about these individuals, but I want to hover around where you were going there in terms of the editing, because this is an editor's movie. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways. I think it's a writer's movie. I think I kind of it's everyone's movie. That everything
It's
is,
a cinematographer's movie. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
they're
yeah.
working. Everyone is just working at their absolute, the top of their game in this, including the actors. And but there are some real standout moments in editing there. When we were trading notes earlier on, you mentioned the cross cutting when they get to Buffalo Bill's place. And for those that don't know, listening in, Caleb is an editor. So tell me, horror and editing expert. What is it about?
Yeah.
What is it about the editing here that grabs you from that point of view?
So there's a place where they, near the end of the movie, they think they found Buffalo Bill's house. The FBI does, and so Clarice is kind of on her own investigation, and there's kind of this red herring that is from the script or the story level, the plot level, um, of they think that they found the where Buffalo Bill lives in Chicago, and they start cross cutting where they've got to this house, and we're cutting back and forth between Buffalo Bill and the FBI showing up at this house, and as that's cross cutting, they start to, like, more than at first it suggests it, but then the actual editing is fully like making you think, tricking you to think that they are at Buffalo Bill's house by them pressing the doorbell. And that's all done through cross cutting. And then what happens is he Buffalo Bill opens the door and it's Clarice.
Yeah.
And I kind of have a bone to pick with this.
Oh no, really? Tell me.
I
Tell me.
do. This is why I wanted to start here.
Yeah, yeah.
That is it is borderline lying to the audience in a way
Ah,
of manipulation, where it is clear that we are watching a movie, almost breaking the viewing experience and the fourth wall, um, of lying to the viewer. Where this is the only kind of instance that I can think of that this movie does that, like where, Deadpool, like is one that comes to mind. That's like that they break the fourth wall, they do whatever they want in that movie. This movie is very straightforward and like very, very credible. And this almost, it rides that line for me of it breaks the credibility, but it doesn't in the end for me, because it is so well worked in with the script of where Clarice is at, that it should be happening at the same time. And that's where it does kind of like, it is almost too perfect, but it works out in the end because of how that, like, how it's worked in with Clarice's story and the way that the chronologically that would work out. Because it almost does turn into such a good reversal while still almost breaking that. Like it's like bending it as much as it can like flex, basically, So that's, but that cross-cutting there is a very, like, that stuck with me of how that worked out, because then to fully, it's that reversal, like it's almost a trope now of like the camera zooms in, dollies in on Jack's face, and he's like, Clarice. Everyone else would be there, like, what's he talking about? But we are like in it close on his face, So but yeah, so like that's one of the things that stuck out. The other, like, so now to talk about the like broader editing of this movie and how it's done, it's just it's perfectly edited. Like the dialogue scenes are just, they're cut like to perfection. Like the pacing of them, the way that it hangs is all building tension for then, like, and that's what this whole movie does, is it's building tension until that final sequence, because like, and the Lecter escape sequence. Those two sequences are the ones that are like really where the movie lets like the release of like what's been building out. So yeah, like the just the way that those scenes are cut, the way that this movie is a very just basic example of cross-cutting, of match cutting, like using, and I would assume that a lot of this was in the script, which you can, if you get into planning out your transitions in the script, which Sid Field is a big fan of, like, of you should always you should always plan your transitions.
I think it has to be, the way this kind of balances together and the way it works with one another. Taking you at Buffalo Bill's house as the example, there is the that key moment that has to come from a script point of view, because if it's not there screenplay to begin with, then it just doesn't work. That can't. There's no way they've shot that and then they've gone, gosh, you know what? This would be a really cool way of doing that, because it's so meticulously planned, and it's so important that it does line up there. And I think this is you're right. This is such a great example of like of editing enhancing something and just hitting it exactly the way it's supposed to go and exactly the way it's supposed to be. But it begins with that screenplay, to bring it back round again to the we as screenwriters, it is a great example of how you should absolutely be thinking of that end product and absolutely be thinking of how will this be edited. It takes a great editor to manage that. But yeah, go on.
Well, no, even to piggyback on that, like the screenwriter, and I guess we us as screenwriters, we have a very unique relationship to everyone else who's on the crew, because our work is done, I mean, the majority of our work is done before shooting. Obviously there's instances where that's, there's stuff being written on location. But you know, a lot of the time, like especially lower budget stuff, like it's the screenwriter is not there if they just, you know, sold a script or you know, wrote it for someone and someone else is taking it to direct. The screenwriter is not there a lot of the time. So
Yeah.
um so yeah, we like us as screenwriters have a weird relationship, but it especially down the line to the editor, because the editor is doing everything in post. So like we're doing everything in pre
Yeah.
as a screenwriter, but the editor's doing everything in post.
Yeah.
And so so there's like even a farther disconnect there. And what's interesting is like the edit is, you know, it's called the final rewrite, and
Mm.
so that's really where that's what's being presented to the audience, that's what's living, you know, that's the final text that's published.
Absolutely. Yeah.
um and so that's where, you know, all of the work that's being done before, especially the screenwriters work, um it's not seen. And so I think highlighting those moments that clearly go back to screenwriting
Yeah.
are important, especially when you're trying to learn writing, you're trying to like to dissect how screenplays are written from a, because um a lot of analysis and, you know, learning is done from already produced work.
Mm.
And so that's something that you have to take into account too, is like all the rewrites that a script goes through to get to its final phase.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, it's all super interesting, and the editing is definitely like just clearly cohesive with the script here. So
Absolutely. Let's talk about the characters here a little bit. I mean, there are two. I think this is best actor, best actress at the Oscars. Again, not necessarily a benchmark of brilliance, but this is on this occasion. My God, like this is these are two towering performances. And interestingly, you look at Buffalo Bill. It is also a terrifying and brilliantly written character, but is just completely overshadowed. You know, you don't. He is Buffalo Bill is the antagonist of this movie. He is the guy who is actually, you know, doing a lot of the damage here. He is the big story motivator. And yet, what do you think of when you think of Silence of the Lambs? You think of TikTok, Clarice, and you think of that horrible noise I'm not going to make on here because it's not ASMR. And you know, you think of that. You think of Anthony Hopkins, and you think of these back and forths, and I think it's a real achievement to do that. Now, the question I have for you here is you've got two great performances there, but obviously the words come from the screen, from the script, and it's how would this would this be as good if you were reading this, would you see those words as iconic written down, or does it take a brilliant actor to make those words iconic? That's I think a really key question when trying to understand dissecting something like this from a screenwriting point of view. What do you think?
yeah, that's a tough question.
It is.
um
It's mean. I'm sorry, but it's
I Well, and like my answer isn't any nicer. Because while the script can be so good, it's only fully realized whenever the actor embodies it, you know? Because especially from a director's point of view, and the actor's point of view, they're taking it and running with it, you know? They're filling in the gaps and really giving the life and face to the characters. Um, because the interesting thing about like novels um and even like reading a screenplay is like you read that through your inner voice, your inner monologue, or whatever. And so like so you're hearing it a certain way, and the script can only, you know, direct you so much. But it's really once you see that embodied by Anthony Hopkins that you're like, oh, this dude ate that dude's liver with fava beans.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Like
Yeah.
um yeah, and so like yeah, it's while the script can be so amazing, I think that like, yeah, you can't have the iconic element without the finished work
Mm-hmm.
of the actor filling that in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
I think
like,
that's the.
and what's
Go on.
no, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think that is the only answer to this. Really, is that it is a bit of both, and it has to be. We're talking about a film that again got those big five. So I think that it is one of those things where everybody working at the top of their game is what has to happen here. But from a observational point of view, I had an interesting thought when I was making my notes here. The Hannibal Lecter appears on screen for 16 minutes, 16 minutes. That's it. Now there are a few others that sprang to mind that I looked up. The amount of time they were on screen. Darth Vader, one of cinema's greatest villains, I would say. Also Hannibal Lecter, one of cinema's greatest villains. 9 minutes Vader was on screen for in A New Hope to do that. More within this genre, Freddy Krueger, 6 minutes is all of his screen time throughout that film. And then slightly longer, but still in the bloated runtime of The Dark Knight. The Joker, Ledger's Joker was 33 minutes in total, and these performances and characters are down in history now as I would say iconic, and they considered some of the best ever in terms of writing and in terms of performance. Now, what I draw from that is less is more. And I think that you have here, and there's a time and place for different things, but I think these great moments, and I've only picked 4 as well. It's not exactly an exhaustive study, but what I'm saying is that I think there is a
wild claim, sir.
I know, goodness, I'm the first person ever to think it as well. But I think that
No.
I think it's interesting that you look at horror as an idea, you look at thrillers, you look at science fiction, pretty much any genre. So often the subtlety is the thing that I think sells it, and with characters and things like that. Do you think that The Silence of the Lambs is a perfect case study for the idea that less is more? And why, I suppose, is the question.
Man.
I'm hitting you with the
yes,
questions today.
Yeah, right. And like, what's funny is they're simple answers,
Yeah.
but it's like, but they're so they can be deep,
Mm.
So like, yeah, I think it's a great case study of looking at how less is more, in certain like realms. But what I think is kind of interesting is that the one thing that they didn't do less is more in, uh, is the amount of information that we receive and where we receive it. Um, because like, in terms like, this movie, if it's trying to accomplish the same as like a Criminal Minds or CSI case, or one of those like investigative cases, um it's not gonna be as interesting as those. It's not as engaging, and I was thinking about that as I was watching this. And it doesn't need to be, because it's doing something different. But this movie gives you, it reveals who Buffalo Bill is. We see him, it kind of peels back who he is. It's not like we're watching the whole movie from his POV, seeing his hands. And so like, it's an interesting like character study of like peeling back the motives and who the characters actually are, um rather than just be like, literally, who is the killer. um so that is like, I think that's like the subtlety that you're getting at, where it's giving us a lot of information, but it's doing it so like with a deft hand,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just kind of like presenting it to you, and it's peel it like it's, and that's even like in the cross cutting of,
Yeah.
like certain scenes where it's, I'm trying to remember one for example, but early on in the movie, there's like, it's cutting from Clarice to Buffalo Bill, and there's a clear like idea that the audience can pick up on that then leads us into Buffalo Bill's scene.
Mm.
And so it's stuff like that that's all done very like swiftly, um, and it adds to that subtlety.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a clear example of less is more.
And you know what?
So
You know what I find really interesting is that you know you have at the heart of this a cannibal that you know that you can find very few crimes that are more hateful than murdering and eating someone. This it may be the pinnacle, in fact,
maybe.
of crimes, and yet here we have somebody that you know, and we're told that he's a cannibal throughout. You know, it's why he's there and all this, that, and the other. Um, but when he makes his escape, he he bites one of the guards. He bites the cheek, and you know you have that kind of moment there, and you know, oh yeah, because he's a cannibal, he bites his cheek. But then he beats the other guy, and we don't see, you know, in if this were made now, I think the temptation would be to show every you know kind of punch and pummeling and you know breaking and things. He's a big guy, Anthony Hopkins, you know, and so to you'd be tempted to do that and but they don't, and they focus on the character and on the face and on the blood kind of going up, things like that. And whilst that doesn't sound particularly subtly, it is restrained, and when especially when you compare it to the sequel of this, the direct sequel of this, where in which you find Anthony Hopkins, and spoilers for that sequel, by the way, if you haven't seen it, then just skip forward about a minute. Um,
It's not as
you,
good, right?
no, it's not quite as good. I love, you know, I loved it. I did enjoy it though. But you have him at a dinner table, having taken the top of a guy's skull off and eating his brain and frying it. Now, the jump from the subtlety of the Silence of the Lambs, and then kind of going fully into demonstrating that, it's almost the reverse of what you should do as a screenwriter, because we say show don't tell, as this is what we do, but in fact on this occasion being told is enough, and we don't need the demonstration necessarily, because I don't think you ever see Lecter actually chowing down on a guy in this film. So it is, I think that restraint is so important there, which yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so one of the other things that stuck out to me on this viewing, um, we were talking, like I mentioned the cinematography, and um, there's the way that each interview scene is shot is so like well developed, well directed, or just well conceived, let's say. Um, and so the one that stuck out that was just like maybe one of my favorite scenes now, um, is whenever she goes back finally and she's trying, like it's the last time that her and Lecter speak, and she's trying to find the name, but then it goes into Lecter launches it into, no, I want to know about you, Clarice. And then it goes into like more of like we're peeling back and looking into her psyche, um and so it becomes like almost like a therapy session. And the way that you look at the way that the others are previously shot, um and then look at this one, and there's the way that it goes to those same close-ups, so it's still similar to how the other ones are shot, but this has movement in it. And so like he's sitting there in a swivel chair,
Mhm.
like I am, and so yeah, yeah, as you and so like she's outside of the cage walking around, but and this starts as they, as she's not wanting to talk about herself, but
Mm.
starts to talk about herself. She's pacing back and forth, and there's this nice like corner where the cage meets that she's kind of rounding. And the way that it's shot is from perspectives. So it's not like over the shoulders or anything. It's just straight on, and then it tracks with as Clarice moves,
Yeah.
and then it tracks from Clarice's point of view with Lecter as he swivels with her,
Yeah.
and as she moves. And the way that that is done is just like a highlight, because like it all is coming back to the direction, the writing, and that's what I wanted to focus on with this example. Is like it's about this idea in this scene is about voyeurism and looking into their each other's psyche, and that's what
Mm.
Lecter's doing. And so he's staring down the camera, so we become Clarice in those shots. Um, and then like, but then we also become Lecter
Yeah.
as we watch her. And so, you know, there's this, I think you even made a video recently on don't write camera direction.
Yes, 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 yes.
And you don't have to. In my brain, the script, in the script, that doesn't have to be written as camera direction, but you can describe that
Yeah.
in a way that communicates that same idea of this, of us looking in on Clarice as Lecter, as us like, or as Clarice feeling that shot of Lecter looking at her.
Mm.
That all can be written in the script, and I don't like, obviously I don't have like a written out form of the, or like way of doing that,
Yeah.
but you know, that is a good example for me that I feel like is it like you don't have to write we're from Lecter's perspective
Yeah.
tracking with her, you know. um
You can imply, though, I think is the thing, isn't it? It's
yeah, it's just a fantastic scene that
mm,
stuck out to me so well. But
yeah. So tell me, and I know the answer to this already, but I'm going to ask you: does the Silence of the Lambs belong in the script department vaults, hidden in the view of Hannibal Lecter? Is that? Which, it's such a weird place to put it this week, but why
There's
not?
it's in the vault with a nice window,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
nice
yeah,
view
yeah,
outside. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it's great. The character work that's going on here, which we didn't even really get much into,
Yeah.
is fantastic. And I don't think that you earn that same level of horror without setting up Clarice's like greenness to, you know, she's a cadet, she's in training, and it earns that throughout the movie to then pay off with that final sequence. And
Yeah.
so like that alone for me is just, yeah, it's
Yeah.
golden.
Now, I mean, it's a joyous film. It's a difficult film to watch, but it's a joyous film to watch, and I think it absolutely belongs in the vaults. It's very ahead of its time in a lot of ways. It tackles some subject matter that again we haven't got to, but you know the idea of from a modern and feminist perspective, it's quite an extraordinary film in its own way. You know the what this means in terms of cinema, and where it sits and the legacy of it, I think is really something very very special. And not to mention the fact that it produced two just outstanding performances that are just it's a great case study for pretty much anything that you will find in film, and one of the reasons why it sits so high on that list.
Yeah. And I think that like for me what really, you know, earns that the Clarice's character and, you know, the feminism behind that,
Mm,
the script never sacrifices character for the credibility of the characters.
mm,
You know, it has like the feminism and all those points, but it never does that at the sacrifice of their credibility. So
yeah.
that's why like the whole movie works.
Caleb, thank you for joining me today. We've been looking at this. It's been a good chat. As with all things, there are so much more we could discuss had we the time. But it's I think we've done a good job there. We will be back next week for more Screenwriters Rewatch. So tune in there. In the meantime, we've got loads of these knocking around on YouTube and Spotify and Apple and all of these other places. Audible, don't forget that. And if you want to have a look at our the TikToks that we were referring to there, we've got a time one about how less is more in horror, and also what Caleb was referring to just a moment ago, writing camera actions. You can find all them on there, also on Instagram and on YouTube as shorts. So yeah, thanks, man. Good chat. And to all of you at home, thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time at the Script Department. Bye-bye.